Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and this is the podcast where we cover the latest Universal news, rumors, and history. And as always, I'm joined by Eric Hersey, who is back tan, but not necessarily rested, right?
No, Jim, you've seen me in the flesh. There's no tanning this white body. Maybe red, but okay. No, we are back from Universal. We are back from Orlando, and just in time to cover all the news that's breaking today for all the Halloween time. It's lots of Halloween news today.
But of course that's how you're supposed to spend your days in July. Thinking about what should I be doing in October. But anyway, before we get to that stuff, we of course need to acknowledge our sponsors, which is unlockedmagic.com. And if you're planning a trip to the Universal Orlando Resort or the Walt Disney World Resort, you seriously need to check out unlockedmagic.com. Listeners to the Epic Universal Podcast are saving up to 12% on theme park tickets. And right now, Unlock Magic is offering a limited special where you can experience 5 days at the Universal Orlando Resort for the price of 3. So to learn more about this special, head to Unlock Magic today. All right. Now, normally, when again, this part of the show, we figure out a way to mention Wicked. In fact, your lovely bride and I, Lauren, did a new episode of I Want That Too just last night. And to be honest, the only time that Wicked came up, she was talking about the shopping that you guys did at the Brown Derby there on Hollywood Boulevard.
Did she get something Wicked and slipped it by me? I didn't realize.
Well, no. What she was intrigued by was being in that store, which is literally down the street from the Wicked exhibit with the Wicked shop at the end. And she said it was just wild to be in there with merch that was 70% off and then walk back out into the park and see these very same items full price. So, it just made you want to buy more stuff, seeing it out in the wild for full price. And I think she was making the comparison that there was Wicked stuff inside the Brown Derby that she then saw in the exhibit store. So there you go. We got our Wicked thing out of the way.
Check marked off. I'll go check her bags. I'm sure we got something Wicked that I wasn't aware of. The Monopoly game or something that was in there.
There we go. All right. So we were talking about Halloween-related stuff. And so do we talk about the new news, like the press release that literally came in 5 minutes ago?
Yeah, I think we start with that. And then we'll go with the press release that came in 10 minutes ago. And then we'll just keep it because it just keeps coming. But it's great news for everyone. The funny thing is, Jim, we're on episode 112 of the Epic Universal Podcast, and you've only done thousands of podcasts. And I heard this Fortnite news. So for those not aware, there is Fortnitemares is out. And I swear we covered it. And I'm like, it's already been done. It was a rumor that we covered months ago. And so I saw this come out and I'm like, didn't they announce this forever? Of course. So it's hard to keep it all together when you're doing, Jim's producing and you're writing all these and recording them. I'm producing. So I've listened to a lot. But yeah, we talked about this weeks, maybe months ago, about this being a thing because it's a scare zone. And our big topic was, this is Epic Games, which didn't Disney make a huge deal with Epic Games and now Universal's working with them? That's kind of interesting, right?
No, that's very interesting. Now, we don't necessarily have information about where this particular scare zone is going to be built out in Hollywood or, for that matter, in Florida. We do know that it allows guests to enter Freaky Fields, which is a Halloween-inspired living battleground that's become overcome by a threatening force, and I feel like we need to pull Miles onto the show because it says here, throughout the scare zone, fans will encounter the Battle Bus along with familiar Fortnitemares characters. So is he familiar at all with the Fortnitemares stuff? Or
I if not him, my oldest, who's been into Fortnite forever. So once again, if this didn't just come in 5 minutes ago, I would have prepped and talked to my family, called a family meeting, so to speak, and be like, all right, we need all the details on Fortnite. But I think everybody is kind of excited. Fortnite is a huge, huge game. It's a highly, it's a highly viewed property that lots of fanfare and so forth. So I will do some research. We'll come back and maybe give some more information. But I know a lot of you out there that play Fortnite are probably pretty excited about this. So scare zones on both coasts.
But continuing the Halloween Horror Night themed news, we now have word on an Evil Dead Burn haunted house for Halloween Horror Night 35, right?
Yeah, so this is the new film that comes out, or just came out July 10th. So this is the Evil Dead Burn. I think it's the 6th house. So there's some good synergy here in terms of getting some hot properties that's in the theaters and also throwing it right out there into the to the houses. But so we just had that announced that just came out. Jim, how familiar are you with the Evil Dead series?
Oh, well, now my brother Peter introduced, in fact, this is the first time I was introduced to Bruce Campbell as a performer and Sam Raimi as a filmmaker. And it was one of these things where, face it, if you've seen any of the early Evil Dead films, they are crazy. Just ridiculously over the top gory, but in a really funny way. And it was one of these things where it's like, who are these guys? And in fact, that to me was half the fun of the early Spider-Man movies, where it was just sort of like, all right, so, when does Bruce Campbell show up? And when do we get, like Evil Dead, like, crazy shots in this movie? And I like how ridiculously loyal Sam Raimi is. He found a way to sneak Bruce Campbell into Oz the Great and Powerful. What was the Doctor Strange movie that he did?
It was the Multiverse of Madness, is, and I was going to say that's the closest I think I've come to watching an Evil Dead, so to speak, because granted, Evil Dead fans, I've met many of them. They evangelize. They love these films. Oh, yeah. I watched the trailer today of Evil Dead Burn, and I don't know if I could finish it because I'm like, oh, things are gory, and I just don't care for that so much. But it turns out, Evil Dead has been around since what, the 80s? Late 70s. Yeah. So there's a lot. And now the newest one is based, it's a standalone film. So it's something, I guess it centers around a grieving family trapped in a home as relatives are transformed into deadites. I'm assuming that's like a zombie. At least the trailer that I watched kind of seemed like that. So it is in the same like world, but there's no like Ash Williams. There is no Bruce Campbell. So, but I think the Evil Dead fans out there are going to be excited. And this is now a house that I would say is going to get a lot of popular, and fanfare. So I think everybody's excited. I don't know if I'm going to go out there and watch the Evil Deads because of this, but like I said, there's a lot of people out there that really love that mix of terror and comedy. Dare I say?
No. Extremely gross, but very funny slapstick. It just, and again, it's Bruce Campbell. How bad can it be?
Right.
Good stuff.
Oh, Jim, did you see or did you hear the leak, the Pandora ad that has the internet rocking? Did you hear about the leaked Pandora ad on somebody was watching or listening to a podcast, and there was this ad that came up that was advertising for Halloween Horror Nights 35, and there was a very famous Crazy Train laugh where they advertised the Ozzy Osbourne house. Somebody hit the button a little early and might find themselves in a little bit of hot water here. Did you see this online or even get to watch the fan that captured?
That's the thing. You're leaving for vacation, and you want to set stuff up when you're out of the office, and you change a 7 that should be a 9. All right. We did sort of know about this, right? This had been, kind of like the Fortnitemares. Again, we'd heard rumors. So
right. Well, this one's a tough one to like debunk. And I don't know if anybody said it, but this one was a full-fledged ad. It would have took a lot of time for someone to deep fake this one. It was the advertisement invited guests to enter the Prince of Darkness's kingdom in a haunted house based on Ozzy Osbourne, playing his music. So it was one of those things. So it was shared on Reddit. You can go out there and find this advertisement, but somebody hit the button a little early, and now it's really hard for them to debunk and say that this is in a house. But I think this is the big house. Obviously, this is their grand finale that they're going to announce probably in the next couple days. Our luck, they'll announce it the moment we're recording, so we won't be able to talk about it.
Of course. But I actually have been thinking of Ozzy lately. There was an interview with Sharon Osbourne just the past couple of weeks or so. And again, she, it's interesting, they were married forever. And, just the notion of when, you've spent decades with somebody and suddenly they're not there. It just, Sharon's doing the best she can, but, and, obviously she's got, Jack and her daughter, but.
Yeah.
Still tough.
Yeah, well, I guess she can somewhat visit his spirit in the Prince of Darkness kingdom if this comes around. So she'll be first in line, I'm sure, to promote the house if it ever gets announced.
Okay. All right. So we were talking earlier about hit movies that Universal Pictures has sent out into theaters. Hey, like that Wicked thing. But the big news this past week has obviously been the crazy box office for the Odyssey, the Christopher Nolan film.
Yeah, and that's Universal through and through. I believe early on they were shooting stuff on the back lot where you could see the giant practical, boat, and we have representations of the Trojan horse in both parks. I saw one for myself. The one in Florida was is half the size, and I don't think it was screen used. The one in Hollywood though. Friend of the show Ashley did confirm that was what was used in the film, so you can see that right now. But yeah, the Odyssey came out and it'd make a lot of money, right?
Oh, crazy money. I guess it's the top grossing live action debut for 2026. And when you combine what it made in North America over its opening weekend and overseas, what is it? It's $264 million. Oh, boy. And so what? $250 million just in the opening weekend.
Wow. I knew it was a big deal, but I didn't know it was that big of a deal. This is, if it gets to the $1 billion mark, this is when I start asking questions about, all right, how big do you have to get an attraction or a land? Is this?
Well, where this is interesting, and this is the part that, friends in the business kind of raise their hand and go, no, wait a minute. It's yes, it's $250 million. But again, this is a film that was shot in IMAX, and this is, and in fact, Christopher Nolan, that's how he wants you to go see it. In fact, Drew Taylor, my co-host on Fine Tuning, was talking about on the most recent episode of that podcast how he actually got to see the Odyssey in Christopher Nolan's preferred IMAX theater, which, you'll love this, Eric, is at Universal City Walk in Hollywood. Evidently, if you want, and in fact, if we finally cave, face it, we're out in LA in a couple of weeks for the D23 Expo, and if that point you finally caved, it's all right, I want to go see the Odyssey. We should actually go to the Universal City Walk to see it in the theater that Christopher Nolan wants us to see his movies in, so we can have the quintessential Odyssey experience.
As long as you Uber me and that horse, you get that horse and you Uber, and we make it over. I'm all for it. No, that sounds great. Okay. I'm going to pay attention to this movie. I'm not the movie buff. I don't pay too much attention, but you get my attention when you're making this kind of money. And I think it was it debuted with a tremendous Rotten Tomato score. It was fresh, right off the get-go. And everybody's talking about it. And I am getting a kick out of the memes. I don't know if you saw this, but everybody is trying to watch it on ridiculous devices now because the Christopher Nolan saying it should only be watched. And so you have people trying to watch it on refrigerators and old Game Boy Advances and stuff. It's relatively humorous. So I am loving what the fan community is also doing with this.
Okay, that now it's fun. Okay, all right, we should check this out. Now, but that's again, that's Hollywood based. But we now have news of a building permit, and is this East Coast or West Coast we're talking about?
We don't know yet, Jim. But this is so. I will give Theme Park Wizard on X shares a lot of the permit stuff, kind of like Alicia Stella in a sense. They do their due diligence. They know how to work those permits. I still haven't figured out how to read them, but I will read their tweets. And this new permit came out, and it offers maybe an early clue about ride technology planned. Now we are guessing maybe the former Lost Continent area, but this also could be something for the UK parks. You know, there's a lot of work going on at Universal. We don't know where they're putting stuff, so to speak. But there is a new, basically it's the notice of commencement lists Garmindale Engineering as the contractor for an equipment installation project scheduled to expire in March 2027. Okay, so that seems like that's stateside, right? Because I don't think they're doing anything yet, but we don't know. So we know that this Garmindale has worked on dark rides like Omnimover style systems before. But what people are theorizing is this Omnimover looks awfully like something that they could use for a Pokemon land or a specific type of game that allows you to catch Pokemon, which, once again, we need to, talk to my children who know far more about this, but they're saying that there is some type of like in-game option where you can like ride and throw and catch Pokemon, and that's kind of what the hypothesis is online. It's everybody saying. So, have we heard anything more about Pokemon possibly taking over the Lost Continent? I know that was rumors.
What's interesting is whenever I pursue this, what I've been hearing is that again, it's looking more like Zelda in that, but the lower corner of Lost Continent. Which, by the way, want to once again give a shout out to our Eye in the Sky bioreconstruct, who's flown over that building and was nice enough to share, the images from the demolition. And did you ever manage to get in there to experience Poseidon's Fury?
No, they had that shut down when we got to go. I did get to walk in the paths, and I got the arm and the legs. I got to. It's such a huge area.
Oh, no, absolutely. But the one effect that everybody talked about with that show was the vortex.
I've seen it online. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, an amazing thing, and evidently they're at this point in the demo that they're finally, you can look down into the building and see the elaborate mechanism that was built to create the vortex, and it's just sort of like, and now they're going to take it apart, and it used to be so cool. I mean, even when the show was kind of dumb, that was great.
Right.
But yeah, that I keep hearing Zelda for that area, especially with the notion that Mythos would then become another, a Zelda-related dining experience. So, but again, I've been wrong, and I will be wrong again. And speaking of wrong, on the most recent show, episode of this podcast, the Epic Universal Podcast, Eric and I talked about the history of the He-Man meet and greet that was done at Universal Hollywood. And this was 78, I want to say December of 78, thereabouts.
We're a little further in the 80s, I think. It was 85, maybe.
Okay,
87.
my mistake.
Something like that. Dyslexia getting us.
Well, but here's the thing, folks, that when Eric and I did the research on that, we had a story point that kind of confused us, because we came across references that there was a He-Man giveaway meet and greet thing that was done in the park there around the Christmas holiday in 85.
Right.
And then we saw this sort of random reference to and they brought it back in February of '86, and we tried to justify it. I mean, it was one of these things where it's like, okay, so is that a typo? Is that when school vacation is in Southern California? We could never make it work.
Yeah.
And so, but we mentioned it, I think, in passing of the show that we have this story element we can't explain. And Nick, on the other hand, Nick, who has an operating brain in his head, Nick, said, well, it's at Universal, and Universal, when it promotes stuff, it buys ads in the Los Angeles Times. So let me go look at back issues of the Los Angeles Times. And sure enough, Nick not only finds ads for the initial, He-Man experience in the park in '85, he then finds the ad for the return.
Yep.
In February of '86. So, as I said to Nick in the email I sent to him when he sent me these ads, he's a rock star. Just again, and I wish I had been smart enough to think about that, because I'm in the Los Angeles Times archive all the time when I'm doing research for stories we do here on the Epic Universal podcast.
I was just a YouTuber, and I was just waiting. My research was all on YouTube, and that. But yeah, this is so he sent over the ads, and they're great, and it's February 15th to 17th. So yeah, it was such a hit during the holiday season. They did come back, and now it's confirmed. Yep. And that is very thank you, Nick, for sending that along.
No, absolutely. Again, I love when people find additional information that corroborate and clear up stories. So, and in fact, I kind of anticipate that on the heels of this week's feature, which keys off a bit of news that broke while Eric was out of town with the family, and deals with Fast and Furious Supercharged, the Orlando version of this attraction. But we'll explain about that story in a sec. But first, there's this. And we're back. All right, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong here. When we did a show back in January of this year, that's when, Universal Destinations and Experiences, that's when they announced that, Fast and Furious Supercharged, the Orlando version of this attraction, which, by the way, has been up and running in that theme park since April of 2018, was going to be closing sometime. In 2027, right? We didn't have an exact date.
No one gave dates. We knew that. We kind of, even before that, once they announced the coaster, we were like, well, you're not going to have two Fast and Furious. But they didn't announce anything. And we still don't, know what's going in. But yeah, we did know it was going to close.
Yep. Well, now, where this gets interesting, again, Universal, I swear to God, Universal Times is deliberately when Eric and I are busy, release the news. So last week, while you guys are actually down, probably physically in the park, this is when the folks at Universal Orlando suddenly did we say 2027? Scratch that. The Florida version of Fast and Furious Supercharged is now going to close before Labor Day of this year. To be specific, August 16th, which, by the way, folks, is 3 weeks and 3 days from when this podcast goes live. And now, before we get started here, Eric, you've experienced this ride, right?
I think we've experienced it twice. I've made sure to go on it at least, and I literally was trying to go on it one more time. But if it tells you how we feel about this ride, I chose to opt out because I'm like, well, we only can do this or that or this or that, and I'm like, well, I've seen it enough. So no, we didn't get to do it one last time. And then they closed it kind of early the day we were there. Like it was closed a couple hours earlier than. They didn't make this announcement yet until afterwards. But yeah, I've witnessed it, Jim. Yeah. I'm guessing you have as well.
I have. In fact, I was there the night that this thing opened. In fact, Nancy was along with me on that trip in 2018 and got to see Vin Diesel from afar. And it was just one of these things where it's like, well, the party was fun. The ride, not so much. Which, again, let's just be honest here, folks. It's the Florida version of Fast and Furious Supercharged is a clumsy clone of what used to be the grand finale of the Universal Studios Hollywood Tram Tour. This big effects-filled finale was, it debuted out in Southern California on June 24th, 2015. And in fact, it was supposed to be the high point of the 50th anniversary celebration of this Southern California tourist attraction. And not for nothing, folks, I want to point out that the original version of Fast and Furious Supercharged, well, that ceased operation last year on March 10th, 2025. And Eric, look, neither version of Fast and Furious Supercharged on the East Coast or the West Coast ever really caught on with the public in the way that the folks at Universal Creative had hoped that they would, which was frustrating because, well, think about this. Out in California, Universal Creative built a 65,000 square foot building to house all of the state-of-the-art technology that was used to create this thing. And just to give you some idea of what we're talking about here, folks, this is an 800-foot-long building. That's longer than 2 football fields.
Yeah.
That was 6 stories tall. Inside, there was a movie screen that was 400 feet long, 40 feet high. That, by the way, would wrap around your tram and create this 270-degree image, which, when they fired up, the 34 projectors that were needed to create this image, and by the way, right behind this giant screen are 50 speakers, which are pushing out 80,000 watts of sound. That's 108 decibels. People at the tram were then bombarded with this state-of-the-art 3D high-def imagery. And thanks to some high-speed fans and some smoke effects that were periodically released, you were supposed to feel like you were being pulled through the streets of Los Angeles at 120 miles an hour, and you were surrounded by the cast of the Fast and Furious films. And by the way, while all of this is going on, your tram is sitting on top of this motion-based platform that's filled with oil, so you're supposed to feel every single bump in the road. And Universal Creative thought, wow, this thing, again, grand finale of the tram tour. It's going to be the next big thing in the stateside parks. And in fact, it's the summer of 2015. It is just weeks after, they've kicked off the official 50th anniversary celebration and opened this new edition of the tram tour. And Universal Creative is meeting with the managers at Universal Studios Florida. In fact, they brought them out west. They're walking them through the building, and they're like, don't you want this for Orlando? And you get why, they do that. Because if you cold-bloodedly look at Universal Florida, they have a history of taking parts of the Universal Hollywood Tram Tour, the encounter with the mechanical shark, the old Kong animatronic, Earthquake the big one. Mm-hmm. And what they did when those things came to Florida is they changed them to standalone theme park attractions, things like Jaws the Ride, Kongfrontation, and again, Earthquake. So this is Universal Creative circling back in the old playbook. They're trying to convince the folks down in Florida that, you need to bring Fast and Furious Supercharged, this thing we just made as the grand finale to the Hollywood Tram Tour. You need to bring that down to Orlando ASAP. And Eric, to their credit, the folks down at Universal Florida are initially a little hesitant. They're like, didn't we just do this with Skull Island, Reign of Kong? I mean, and by the way, I want to remind you folks, this is the summer of 2015. That attraction doesn't actually open over at Islands Adventure till July of 2016, but it's under construction right now.
Okay.
All right. And what they have done is they had taken King Kong 360 3D, which had been added to the tram tour in July of 2010. And had done a Jaws the Ride. They turned it into a standalone attraction, which again was going to open the following summer. July of 2016 is Skull Island Reign of Kong. So the folks at Universal Florida are like, how exactly is Skull Island Reign of Kong going to be different from Fast and Furious Supercharged? I mean, on both rides, you're basically riding on a tram. You then pull onto a motion base that's between two giant screens, and then guest watch footage that's been synced up to move with the images on both screens, and to which the people in Hollywood, again, they made no bones about this. They really wanted to sell Florida on the idea of buying a copy of Fast and Furious Supercharged. They launched this high-pressure sales pitch. And they're like, oh, no. Completely different ride experiences. I mean, for example, Skull Island, Reign of Kong, guests are sitting on a tram-like vehicle between two 200-foot-long screens on a water-filled motion base. Now, on Fast and Furious Supercharged, guests are surrounded by a 400-foot-long screen, which surrounds them. It's 270 degrees it completely fills their field of vision, while on this case, they're sitting on an oil-filled motion-based pleasure. I mean, oil, water, two entirely different fluids. And more to the point, a 400-foot-long screen that wraps around you is so much more impressive than two 200-foot-long screens that are just to either side. Oh, and did I also mention there's a simulation of moving at 120 miles an hour and wind and water in your face and smoke. It completely different experience.
Jim, that sounds like people trying to sell iPhone 15s and versus iPhone 16s. It's like, they're totally different. They're every year they get us. But yeah, I get it.
All right, but also worth noting that just months earlier, Furious 7 had arrived in theater. Now, this is by the way, this is the edition of that film franchise where they said goodbye to Paul Walker's character. So a lot of people came out to see how they were going to pull that off.
Yeah.
Given, remember, quite famously, he died while they were shooting this in that horrible car accident. But anyway, the previous edition, Fast and Furious 6, had made $744 million worldwide. Furious 7, Eric, made $1.4 billion. It's literally double the business. And not only has Universal just announced that they're going to make more Fast and Furious movies, but the characters of Hobbs and Shaw, they're played by Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. They're about to be spun off into their own series. So. Yeah. The not-so-subtle pressure that's being brought to bear at this moment to the folks at Universal Orlando, it's like, don't you want to support Universal's new billion-dollar franchise? I mean, shouldn't this film have a presence in at least one of your theme parks? And look, there were folks at Universal Creative who still felt that this is a bad idea. Especially since many of the rides at Universal Florida that had previously been based on things that guests could experience when they rode the tram tour out in California had long since closed. I mean, Confrontation, Eric, that closed back in September of 2002. Earthquake, the big one, that closed in November of 2007, whereas Jaws the Ride hung in there till January of 2012, only to be pulled down so that they could build Diagon Alley. And they were just folks at Universal Orlando who were like, this feels like we're going backwards. Maybe we shouldn't do this. But they still couldn't figure out a way to say no. But so it went forward. And in a moment, we'll talk about how Fast and Furious Supercharged went forward at Universal Studios Florida. But first, this. Eric, there are just times when we do the show where I feel bad because You never got to experience Earthquake the Big One, the Florida version, is a standalone ride.
No, just through YouTube, Jim. I vicariously live. I've gone through all of the rides through YouTube except for Jaws. We just won't make it through that one.
Okay. Now, have you seen the redo of Earthquake the Big One, the Disaster, the major motion picture ride starring you?
Oh God, this had Dwayne Johnson, or was that the next one? Yeah. No, I've watched a couple of these. Now I don't know how it was different per se. I know the Earthquake the Big One. I don't know how this one was so much different than Earthquake.
Well, this one debuted in the park in January of 2008, and to be honest, it was pretty much. It used the same physical plant. It used virtually the exact same physical effects. But where it was different is that there was a pre-show where you got to meet the gentleman who was in charge of the movie studio, that was making this disaster movie. His name was Frank Kincaid, but it was played by Christopher Walken.
Yes. I've seen bits. Yes, now this is refreshing. Okay.
Yeah, and now what's interesting about the Frank Kincaid moment in the pre-show is this is when Universal introduced Musion, which is their version of the Pepper's Ghost effect. And what Universal did that was different than what Disney did. I mean, Disney was famous for doing Pepper's Ghost with, floor-to-ceiling sheets of highly polished glass.
Right.
Whereas what Universal did, and it resulted in actually a much sharper image, was a combination of digital projection and a sheer piece of Mylar that was at an angle, and that was just enough to sort of throw you off like, wow, I mean, you knew it was Pepper's Ghost, but it's like, that is the clearest Pepper's Ghost I've ever seen. So anyway, this effect gets introduced with the Disaster, a major motion picture ride starring you, attraction that comes online at Universal Studios Florida in January of 2008. It then proceeds to walk around the park. It's the very same technology that's used in the pre-show of Harry Potter in the Escape from Gringotts, when you're in Bill Weasley's office and he's interacting with a Blordock, the goblin. And by the way, this is also what they use to put all of those partygoers on stage in Fast and Furious Supercharged, not to mention when you get to see Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson and, Ludacris, in the physical attraction. I bring up Disaster because Disaster closes in September of 2015, and then the building right next door to it, where the Beetlejuice Graveyard Review was presented, that closes down in January of 2016. And this was done because they needed all of the space from those two attractions to build the Fast and Furious Supercharged complex for Florida. And Eric, this was a point of frustration to the folks at Universal Studios Florida, because it's like, in order to create this one new attraction, you had to shut down two rides. You had to shut down, the Disaster thing, as well as the theater that Beetlejuice Graveyard Review was presented in. And by the way, that construction went from January 2016 through October of 2017, so 22-month build.
But that, from an operation standpoint, Jim, I mean, Disaster used fairly similar trams, so it's not like the new Fast and Furious gave that much more capacity, right? So they went 22 months with two rides down to come back to not have that much more capacity. That's interesting.
And remember, you're also losing. They would often do 4 and 5, sometimes 6 shows a day of Graveyard Review. But again, they needed the space. They were building a 50,000 square foot building, which, by the way, is smaller than the 60,000 65,000 square foot facility that held the grand finale of the tram tour out in California. And just the construction of the building took $17 million. And I think, as you pointed out, while they had a tram-like vehicle with earthquake, they couldn't use it. That they had to literally build a brand new vehicle, which I want to say down in Florida, it's known as the party bus. But what the folks in Florida kept saying, all right, this will be okay. This will be okay. If Florida's version of Fast and Furious Supercharged actually plays to full capacity all day long, that's 2,100 guests an hour. So it'll be worth it. We got to hope that this. But again, just remember, Florida's paying a lot of money up front. They had 2 attractions shut down for 22 months while this was being built. It's yes, okay, the ride film already exists. We don't have to pay to make that. So they throw this thing open in April of 2018 and immediately learn the hard way that this isn't how people want to experience Fast and Furious. And in fact, we've actually talked previously on the show about the first thing that was done for the Universal Tram Tour in regard to Fast and Furious. Remember the extreme close-up thing we talked about?
When people think of Fast and Furious, they want to see dancing cars, Jim. They don't think of roller coasters. I mean, finally, I think somebody got the memo in 2025, 26. But they used the KUKA arms for the dancing cars, right? Or something like that?
They had 500-pound shells of muscle cars at the end of these KUKA arms that dance. But you nailed it in one. In fact, that's the thing they learned the hard way. People didn't want to look at muscle cars dance. People didn't want to be looking out from a party bus at a simulation. I mean, don't get me wrong. That they spent a lot of money to create a 4-minute long Fast and Furious ride experience. I mean, in fact, that they shot it down in Playa Vista. They brought the cast back. And remember, the way the thing ends is you literally seem to jump off on an unfinished bridge. And I've always loved the moment at the very end of this thing where in the nose portion of this screen, the very center of the screen, when it's over, the center part of the screen lifts up, but they release this cloud of smoke, and you drive forward into the screen and then come into your post-show scene. But it's a killer effect, and they clearly spent the money. But again, this wasn't what people wanted from Fast and Furious. And as Eric just pointed out, that we now have the Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift coaster out in California, where when you get on board this coaster, you are sitting in replicas of the cars from the film series. So, I mean, if you're a fan of the film at all, the notion of I'm in the car, I'm in Dom's car. And then you take off down the hill and you do inversions and this thing spins. And by the way, there are a number of folks who have experienced this attraction. There are folks who are getting on it out in California right now, folks. It still hasn't officially opened, Eric.
Yeah. Lots of news that we didn't cover in this portion. But is Drew experiencing this at 2 a.m. or in his neighborhood? I think there's a lot of scuttlebutt right now about the sound still coming through, right?
Yeah, they are. In fact, that's supposedly why they haven't necessarily turned the key on this thing, that there is still, they're still futzing with the sound profile. They want to be a good neighbor out in Hollywood, and they did make certain assurances to the community about noise levels and that sort of thing. But at least as of right now, they haven't quite gotten it right. But here's the thing: we are 6 weeks out now from Labor Day, and at that point, summer season is over, and as we've been talking about at length earlier in the show, Universal is going straight into Halloween Horror Nights. So
we won't have that issue here in Orlando, though, and that track is coming together fast. I got to witness it in person, and like you said, Buy Reconstruct is sending wonderful photos. But in Florida, we won't worry about the people screaming. But yeah, you know, in Hollywood, we have a little different story. But I think this is what everybody wanted with this attraction, right? Everybody wanted a fast roller coaster.
They did, and they wanted to physically get into the cars, not look at them from a distance, not watch them dance. But to sort of bring this story full circle, we talked earlier about the folks at Universal who, again, initially resisted, but ultimately caved in. And it's all right, we'll bring this to Florida. But again, remember, this comes online April of 2018. It's now 3 years later. It is the fall of 2021. And the Attractions Expo, which is held by the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, is being held in Orlando. And Terry Koo, the Senior Vice President and Chief Creative Officer of Universal Creative, is on a panel taking questions from the audience. And somebody stands up and asks Terry, is there anything, you know, and Terry had worked for Disney. Terry had worked for Universal. Terry had worked in some big stuff.
I saw his plaque. He was his name is in the queue for Spider-Man on the wall.
That tells you exactly the level that Terry Koo works at.
Yeah.
All right. And so they flat out asked Terry, is there anything, if you looking back over your career, that you would have done differently? And he's up on stage and he thinks for a moment and he finally says, I wish I had stopped our senior management in Florida from building the Fast and Furious attraction. And, you know, it's one of these things where, and the room just makes a noise like, wow. You know, it's like, that's the quiet part being said out loud. And Terry, you know, tries to soften the remark a little bit. He's like, well, it's a good attraction, but it's just not what it should be. Long story short, the attraction it should be is a coaster, and that's now what's been completed and is being tested in Hollywood, and what is still being built and hopefully will come online next year.
It's coming
in Florida.
Yeah.
But anyway, just to, again, to remind folks, Fast and Furious Supercharged will permanently close on August 17, 2026. The very last day of operation is August 16th. So if you feel the need to get on the party bus one last time, you need to be in that park by the 16th.
Yeah, and Jim, I'll tell you what, the attraction itself, the queue, and like the character actors that you get to interact with and so forth on there are probably some of the better parts of the, you know, like you get to walk through and you get to see some cool cars and it's nicely themed. But, you know, when we were out on the Hollywood tram earlier this year, they didn't have this open. It's shut down. And we kind of abruptly said, all right, that's it. I see that attraction would be perfect to end a tram because like you're on a tram, you don't expect screens to come out. You don't expect to go fast, everything like that. So I think it was just like you said, they tried to really shoehorn it in and it was perfectly a great ending for a tram, but not so much for its own attraction when you could have probably, truthfully, I would have much rather had Earthquake or Disaster. Like that seemed like it was a better fit, but not sure what's going in. Is it going to be a queue? Are we going to get something new?
Well,
it's so interesting.
You know, again, there has been discussion about what, you know, how, again, remember, this is an 800-foot long building.
Yep.
Length of 2 football fields. It's a sizable piece of real estate. And, there's a lot of folks who point out that, Universal Hollywood only has one Harry Potter land. And wouldn't it be interesting if there were 2? On the other hand, Fast and Furious is still a giant franchise for the company. In fact, I want to remind folks that what's supposed to be the very last Fast and Furious film, Fast Forever, also known as Fast and Furious 11, that's supposed to arrive in theaters on March 17, 2028. So I'm assuming both of the coasters will be open on both coasts at that point, but
yeah, we'll see if the noise complaints go down, Jim.
There we go.
Hopefully Hollywood will open before Orlando, but it's now a literal race, Fast and Furious, to see who opens first.
Ooh, I like that. And with that, folks, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Epic Universal Podcast. Again, want to thank Eric Hersey for chasing down all of the great news stories we had in the front of this week's show. And likewise, want to thank Nick for burrowing through, all those back issues of the Los Angeles Times to find that amazing He-Man ad that ran in the Times back in February of '86. And by the way, if you have topics or suggestions for stuff that you would like Mr. Hersey and myself to cover on this podcast, feel free to send those along through social media. Anything else I need to mention here, Eric?
Well, Jim, I think we have our show for next week almost, because you and I are going to be in Philly. We finally are going to make it happen, right?
That's right. We are driving down to Philadelphia to go to the Franklin Institute to finally see the Universal exhibit there. So, can't wait. Very much looking forward to hanging out with you and the family, and more to the point, just finally getting to see this exhibit. Really been looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, and they've been advertising it now. It used to start as the Epic. It was like an Epic exhibit, but I get served tons of ad, and now it's just the Universal experience. So it's always been, so I don't know if they made changes or what, but we'll get to finally recap and tell you what we saw there, and you'll have a couple months, maybe. I think it ends in September to go down. So stick with us next week.
Now, speaking of which, though, the irony here, did you see what's coming into the Franklin Institute next year?
A little Star Wars.
There we go.
It sounds like we might have to make this another pilgrimage.
Yeah, there we go.
We'll see if we can bring Dan in. We'll say, Dan, come travel from Missouri. He's got a longer drive.
There we go. And we'll all go find some cheesesteaks. All right. Well, on that note, folks, again, want to thank you for listening to the Epic Universal Podcast, and Eric and I will be back next week.